In a vast desert of digital noise, find your peaceful oasis in the glowing neon of our cinematic storytelling. We offer a place for deep reflection, raw emotion, and the beauty of art. Click subscribe now and find your sanctuary in our world of vivid stories.
Notification came through at 4047 in the morning Oslo time. I almost didn't check my phone. I'd been on a 14-hour rotation at the offshore processing facility, and my body had finally stopped arguing with me long enough to sleep, but something made me reach for it. Some old instinct that I still haven't been able to explain. It was a listing alert from Zillow for my own address. I sat up in the dark of my crew quarters, the North Sea humming against the hull somewhere below me, and I read it 3 times. 4 Briarwood Lane, Clearwater, Tennessee. Estimated value $410,000. Status under contract. My name is Willa. I'm 32 years old. I've spent the last 4 years working pipeline integrity for an energy contractor, rotating 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off, living out of a duffel bag in places where the sun either never sets or never rises. I bought my house in Clearwater when I was 27, with the first real money I ever had. A signing bonus that felt obscene coming from a girl who grew up watching her mother clip coupons on Sunday nights. That house was the only thing in my life that didn't move. I pulled up the listing. Someone had taken photos. Professional ones, with the wide-angle lens that makes rooms look bigger than they are. My living room. My kitchen with the subway tile I'd spent 3 weekends installing myself. The back porch where I kept a rocking chair I'd never actually sat in because I was never there long enough to use it. Listed by Conrad Beaumont Realty. My brother's name is Conrad. I didn't call him. I didn't call my mother either. What I did was lie back down on that narrow bunk, stare at the ceiling, and start thinking. That is the thing about working in environments where a single miscalculation can rupture a line and kill 6 people. You learn to think before you move. You learn to let the anger pass through you like weather. Acknowledge it and set it aside, because panic is expensive and patience is free. By the time my alarm went off at 6, I already knew what I was going to do. I just needed to know what I was walking into first. I texted my supervisor and told him I had a family emergency. I had 12 days of banked leave. I booked a flight from Bergen to Nashville, connecting through Amsterdam, leaving that afternoon. Then I called my property manager. Her name is Faye, and she is 73 years old, has managed rentals in Clearwater for 4 decades, and does not tolerate nonsense from anyone. "Willa," she said, and the pause that followed told me everything. "I've been trying to reach you." "What happened?" Another pause. "Your brother came by about 3 weeks ago. Said you'd given him authority to handle the property while you were away. He had paperwork. I asked him to send it over before I did anything, and he said it was already handled. He didn't need me anymore." She exhaled. "Honey, I am so sorry. I didn't know he was going to. How far along is the sale?" "Closing is scheduled for next Thursday. 8 days. I had 8 days. "Don't do anything," I said. "Don't call anyone. I'm on my way home." I spent the flight from Bergen to Amsterdam doing 2 things, reading every document in my email that related to that house and drafting a message to my attorney. Here is what Conrad had done. 2 years ago, when I first took the overseas rotation, I had signed a general power of attorney so that someone could handle things like renewing my vehicle registration and dealing with the occasional plumbing emergency. I'd given it to my mother because I trusted her, which in hindsight was a failure of imagination on my part. At some point in the last 6 months, she had given it to Conrad. Conrad, who had been unemployed since his landscaping business failed. Conrad, who had borrowed money from 4 separate people in our family and paid back exactly none of them. Conrad, who had called me 8 months ago asking if he could borrow $40,000 to get out from under a debt he refused to explain, and who had not spoken to me since I said no. What Conrad apparently did not know, what neither he nor my mother had bothered to learn before they decided to liquidate my life, was that 18 months ago I had done something. A small thing. A quiet thing. The kind of thing you do when you work in risk management and you understand, at a cellular level, that the systems people trust are only as reliable as the people operating them. I had transferred the property into a living trust. The Willa Marchetti Revocable Living Trust, to be precise. Documented, notarized, recorded with the county clerk in Tipton County, Tennessee. My mother was not a trustee. Conrad was not a trustee. The power of attorney they were operating under granted authority over my personal accounts and individual decisions. It did not grant authority over the trust. I knew this. My attorney knew this. The title company. Had anyone bothered to run a title search, would have known this. No one had run a title search. The buyer was a man named Philip Hart. I looked him up on the flight. He had an LLC registered in Georgia, a portfolio of single-family rentals across 3 states, and a habit of buying distressed or off-market properties for cash to avoid the delays that came with traditional financing. He was not stupid, but he had moved fast, the way people move fast when they think they're getting a deal, and he had skipped the step that would have told him the ground beneath this transaction was not solid. He was about to lose $410,000. I landed in Nashville at 2 in the afternoon. It was the first week of October, and the trees along the highway were just starting to turn. I hadn't been home in 9 months. Under different circumstances, I might have let myself feel something about that. I drove straight to Clearwater without stopping. Conrad's truck was in my driveway. There was a lockbox on the front door, one of those realtor boxes, and through the front window I could see him sitting at my kitchen table with a woman I didn't recognize. Papers spread out between them. 2 glasses of sweet tea like they were hosting a dinner party in a house that didn't belong to them. I sat in my rental car for a moment. The anger was there. I acknowledged it. I set it aside. Then I got out, walked up to my own front door, punched in the code. They hadn't changed it, and walked inside. Conrad looked up. For just a second before he could get his face under control, I saw it. Surprise, and underneath the surprise, something else. The look of someone who had been certain they'd finish before the other person even knew the game had started. Willa. He recovered fast. I'll give him that. He leaned back in his chair like a man with nothing to be nervous about. You're back early, am I? The woman at the table introduced herself. Her name was Greta, and she was the selling agent. Conrad had hired her through his realty contacts, cutting Faye out entirely. She was professional and polished and clearly already uncomfortable, though she was trying not to show it. Your brother has been handling the sale on your behalf, she said carefully. We're just going over the final numbers before closing next Thursday. I pulled out the chair across from Conrad and sat down. And how are the numbers looking? Conrad slid a paper across the table. 410,000, minus commissions, minus the payment to whatever creditor had apparently replaced the previous creditor. He'd been cycling through them for years. The net was about 320,000. Already earmarked, already spoken for. The buyer is paying cash, Conrad said. It's a clean deal. You're going to walk away with a good chunk of money here. That's generous of you, I said, deciding what I walk away with. Something shifted in his face. You weren't going to do anything with it. You're never here. It's still mine. It's a house, Willa. It's an asset sitting idle while He stopped himself. While you're what? He looked at the table. I owe some people. It got complicated. I almost felt something then. Not sympathy exactly, but I understood the particular humiliation of being a person who keeps finding new ways to end up in the same hole. I understood it because I had watched it my entire childhood, and I had made very deliberate choices to become someone different. And those choices had cost me things. Relationships, ease, the simple comfort of being liked by my own family. And apparently they had still not been enough to protect me. How much? I asked. 80,000. I nodded. I looked at Greta, who was very still. Where's my mother? I asked Conrad. She's at her place. She doesn't want to be involved in the... She signed over the POA to you. She's already involved. He didn't have an answer for that. I reached into the folder I'd been carrying since Amsterdam and set a document on the table between us. Greta leaned forward. Her eyes moved across the page, taking in the trust seal, the date, the county recording stamp. I watched her expression change the way weather changes over open water. Fast, and then very, very still. What is this? She said. It wasn't quite a question. Title to this property was transferred to the Willa Marchetti Revocable Living Trust 18 months ago, I said. The power of attorney my brother is operating under covers my personal accounts and individual decisions. It does not cover trust assets. He doesn't have the authority to sell this property. He never did. Conrad stared at the document, then at me, then back at the document. You didn't tell me about any trust. I didn't think I needed to tell you. I didn't think you were planning to sell my house. Willa? The signature on the sale contract, I said, turning to Greta. That's not a valid sale. Whoever signed on behalf of the owner did not have authority to do so. which means your buyer just wired $410,000 for a property he has no legal claim to. The color left Greta's face in one smooth, terrible motion. The wire, she said quietly. It cleared this morning. Conrad went rigid. You need to call your buyer, I said to Greta, right now. Because what has happened here is wire fraud. The money crossed state lines based on forged authority. That is a federal crime. Greta's hand was already on her phone. Conrad pushed back from the table. Willa, listen to me. We can fix this. I'll pay you back. I just needed. It was supposed to be temporary. You didn't ask me. I knew you'd say no. So instead, you forged a real estate transaction using a power of attorney it didn't cover, let a buyer wire $400,000 into an account you don't own, and spent part of it before I landed. I looked at him. That is not a temporary situation. That is a federal crime. I'm your brother. I know. That was the hardest part. Not the money, not the house. The fact that I knew him, really knew him. Had known him since I was 4 years old, and he used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms because he was scared and wouldn't admit it. I knew exactly who he was and exactly what he had done, and those two things were both true at the same time. And I had learned a long time ago that love was not the same thing as liability. Greta stepped outside to call Philip Hart. Through the kitchen window, I could see my back porch. The rocking chair was still there. Someone had moved it slightly, turned it to face the yard instead of the door. A small thing. It made me furious in a way the rest of it hadn't. Conrad's phone rang. He looked at the screen, looked at me, and didn't answer it. That's probably Philip Hart, I said. It rang again. On the third call, he picked up. I only heard one side of it, but one side was enough. Philip Hart was not the kind of man who absorbed a loss quietly. I could hear his voice through the phone from across the table, and what he was saying was not complicated. He wanted his money back. He wanted it back today. And if it was not back today, he was going to involve his attorneys, the police, and the State Real Estate Commission in that order. Conrad kept saying, I understand, and let me explain. And I just need a few days. And I watched him shrink with every response. Watched him become the version of himself he always became when the fiction he'd been maintaining finally met reality. Small and frightened, and genuinely bewildered that it had come to this, as if he had not been the one who built the road to this exact moment. Greta came back inside. She looked like someone had just handed her a bill for something she hadn't ordered. He's calling the police, she said to Conrad. To me, she said, I had no knowledge that the POA was being used outside its scope. I want to be clear about that. I believe you, I said. You should still talk to an attorney. She nodded. She gathered her papers. She left. Conrad and I were alone in my kitchen. He was sitting with his elbows on the table, his face in his hands, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The $80,000, I said finally. The debt you were trying to cover, who is it? He named a man. I didn't know him personally, but I knew the type. Private lending, high interest, the kind of arrangement that starts as a favor and becomes something else by the third month. I can't get the wire back, Conrad said into his hands. The money went to the account Philip wired it to. The commission was taken out. Part of it is already. He stopped. Gone, I said. I was going to pay you back. With what? You haven't had a steady income in 2 years. He didn't answer. 2 police cruisers arrived 20 minutes later. Philip Hart had made good on his timeline. I met the officers at the door and walked them through the documentation. The trust deed, the POA, the sale contract, the wire confirmation. One of them had done some kind of fraud training. He understood the structure of it faster than I expected. The other one kept writing things down without any expression at all. Conrad gave a statement. He did not lie to the police, which surprised me. He was many things, but apparently not a man who could look a uniformed officer in the face and keep a fiction going. He told them what he had done, why he had done it, what he had thought he could get away with. He cried at some point. I did not watch that part. My mother arrived while they were still there. I don't know who called her. Maybe Conrad, maybe a neighbor. Maybe she had been waiting somewhere close by the way people wait when they know something is going to happen, but they've convinced themselves they're not responsible for it. She came to the front door and stopped when she saw the officers. Willa, she said, and then you came back. It's my house, I said. Her face did something complicated. My mother was not a cruel person. She was a person who loved her son more than she understood the consequences of that love, who had spent my entire childhood making accommodations for Conrad's choices and calling it family loyalty. She had handed him the power of attorney because he had asked her, and she had said yes before she thought about what yes meant. I didn't know he was going to, she started. You gave him the authority without asking me. He said you would have wanted, Mom. I said it quietly. Don't. She pressed her lips together. The power of attorney was mine, I said. You transferred it without my knowledge. Whether you knew exactly what he was planning or not, that is going to matter to an attorney and it is going to matter to a judge, and I need you to understand that before you say anything else. She sat down on the couch she'd picked out with me 7 years ago when I first bought the furniture. When she had been proud of me in the uncomplicated way parents get to be proud before everything between you becomes a negotiation. She sat there and she didn't say anything else. The officers finished. They told Conrad he would be contacted by the county DA's office. Philip Hart's attorneys were already moving on civil recovery. The officer who'd done the fraud training told me on his way out that the combination of wire fraud and forged real estate documentation was going to result in federal charges, not just state. He said it matter-of-factly, the way people say things when they are doing their job. And the facts are simply the facts. Conrad looked at me one more time before they left. He didn't say I'm sorry. He said, I didn't think you'd find out this fast. I have thought about that a lot since, about what it tells you when the regret someone expresses is not for what they did, but for how quickly they got caught. About what it means to love someone who sees your absence as an opportunity. I walked my mother to her car after he left. We stood in the driveway in the October evening and I could smell the leaves coming down from the ridge, and somewhere a few streets over, someone was burning something in a fire pit. I'm not pressing charges against you, I said, but I am revoking the POA. Today, I need you to come with me to a notary tomorrow and sign the revocation, or I will have my attorney pursue you as a co-respondent. She nodded. She looked older than she had 9 months ago, or maybe I was just seeing her differently now. Did you know? I asked. Not the details. Just, did you know what he was planning? She looked at the trees for a long time. I thought it would be done before you came home, she said. That was not a no. I went back inside. I locked the door. I stood in my kitchen for a minute, looking at my subway tile, my counters, the dent in the drywall by the back door that I'd been meaning to patch for 2 years. Everything was exactly where I had left it, and also somehow completely different, the way places feel after something has happened in them. I moved the rocking chair back to where it was supposed to be. Then I sat in it for the first time. It was cold out, too cold really, but I sat there anyway, in my coat, watching the yard go dark. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is a version of this story where the ending is triumphant, where everything clicks into place and the person who protected herself gets to feel good about it. But what I felt mostly was tired. Tired in the particular way you get tired when you have done everything right and it still cost you something. Your family's comfortable lie about itself. The version of your brother you'd been holding on to since those thunderstorm nights. The small hope you'd stopped admitting you still had that one day the arithmetic of your family would add up to something other than this. Conrad was charged 6 weeks later. Federal wire fraud, forgery, criminal impersonation. Philip Hart's civil recovery suit was filed simultaneously. The $80,000 Conrad had used to pay his creditor was documented. The remaining funds were frozen pending the proceedings. My mother signed the POA revocation the next morning. She didn't speak much during it. On the way out of the notary's office, she put her hand on my arm and said, I love you, Willa. I said, I know you do. That is a different thing from saying I know. I went back to Oslo 3 weeks later. My leave was running out and there was no reason to stay longer. I'd done what I came back to do. I'd changed the locks, updated the property manager, and left Faye with a very clear set of instructions and an authorization letter that named my attorney as the sole point of contact for any legal matters. At the airport, I bought a coffee and sat by the gate and thought about the rocking chair. About how I had owned it for 5 years and never once used it until the night my brother was taken away in a police car. About how it had taken all of that to finally make me stop moving long enough to sit in my own yard. I thought about that for a while. Then I boarded the plane. If you've ever built something with your own hands and your own years and had someone decide it was theirs to take, drop something in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one. I've thought a lot about what Conrad said right before the officers walked him out. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I didn't think it would go this far. What he said was, I didn't think you'd find out this fast. That sentence has stayed with me longer than any of it. Longer than the Zillow alert at 4 a.m. Longer than my mother's silence in the notary's office. Because it tells you exactly what kind of thinking produces exactly this kind of outcome. He wasn't sorry he had done it. He was sorry the timing hadn't worked out. There is a version of Conrad's life where none of this happens, where he makes different choices in his 30s, builds something small but real, stops treating other people's stability as a resource he can access when his own runs dry. That version of him was always available. It required nothing supernatural, nothing lucky. It required only the same kind of patience and discipline that I had applied, imperfectly, over a decade of difficult work in difficult places. The version of Conrad who ends up in handcuffs in my kitchen is not the product of bad luck. He is the product of a long series of small decisions, each one slightly easier to make because the last one went unpunished. That is how it works, not as some cosmic judgment handed down from outside, but as simple, mechanical consequence. The choices you make build the life you live, and the choices you don't make, the protections you don't set up, the conversations you don't have, the documents you don't file, those have consequences too. I almost didn't set up that trust. It felt overly cautious at the time. It felt like I was preparing for a scenario that would never actually happen, because I didn't want to be the kind of person who distrusted her own family enough to protect herself from them. I'm glad I did it anyway. What I want to say, if you take anything from this at all, is that intelligence without action is just anxiety. I had known for years that my brother was unreliable. I had known that the power of attorney was a vulnerability. Knowing it wasn't enough. What protected me wasn't my intuition, or my suspicion, or even my preparation in the abstract sense. What protected me was the specific, boring, unglamorous act of sitting down with an attorney and filing paperwork. That is it. That is the whole thing. Not a dramatic confrontation, not clever words. A recorded document in a county clerk's office in Tennessee. And the moral part of it, the part I keep coming back to, is that integrity isn't something you perform in the big moments. It's something you build in the quiet ones, when nobody's watching and nothing seems urgent. I built that trust on a Tuesday afternoon between rotations in a law office that smelled like old carpet, because it was the responsible thing to do. That Tuesday afternoon is why I still have my house. Conrad built his outcome across 100 small Tuesdays where he chose the easier thing instead of the right one. I don't say this to condemn him. I say it because I think most of us are closer to both versions of that than we'd like to admit. I've cut corners. I've avoided hard conversations. I've let things slide because dealing with them required more of me than I had that day. The difference between a life that holds and a life that collapses under pressure is usually not one dramatic failure of character. It's accumulation. It's whether the small choices, made quietly over time, are moving you towards something solid or away from it. I sat in that rocking chair for a long time the night it was all over. It was cold and I was tired and the yard was dark. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd survived something I shouldn't have had to survive in the first place. But I was still there. The house was still mine, and that was built on something real. That was enough.